Hi, everyone. Welcome so much to the Green Nurse podcast, an unfiltered discussion related to health and healthcare. My name is Amie.
And my name is Sarah.
And we are your hosts for today. So today we have such an enlightening episode, and actually something we've never talked about before, which is kind of weird over the last 3 years that we've never mentioned this, but we're going to talk about nurse influencers. So before I say anything, and Sarah, please take it away.
I am so excited with our guest today. I have known her for a while, so I would love to introduce Amanda Guarniere. She's an Ivy League educated nurse practitioner, keynote speaker, and career mentor who helps nursing professionals find and land their dream jobs. She founded the Résumé Rx in 2018 and since then has grown the community to over 40,000 nursing students and professionals worldwide. The Résumé Rx was born out of the desire to see a world where medical professionals feel empowered, balanced, personally and professionally fulfilled. Amanda has been featured in Scrubs Magazine, Nurse.org, Indeed Career Guide, KevinMD.com, and NurseGrid. She's also a podcast host. She hosts the Nurse Becoming podcast. And in her downtime, Amanda is a true crime junkie, likes trail running or curling up with a good book, and enjoys soaking up the pleasures of family life with her husband and 3 girls. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to chat with you.
I'm so excited because I feel like we have a lot in common. We're all nurses, we're working parents, entrepreneurs, and podcasters. So just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your nursing background.
Sure. So I've been an NP now for 12 years. Actually, my commencement, it just came up in my Facebook memories the other day. 12 years ago, yesterday was my NP commencement. And I was a non-traditional student in the sense that I had a bachelor's degree in another field, and then I went into an accelerated master's entry program and graduated with dual certifications in adult and women's health. And I practiced for probably 6 or 7 years, just clinical practice, full-time, very kind of traditional roles. And after becoming a parent in 2016, after having my twins, that's when I had a little bit of questioning or kind of enlightenment, if you will, about, okay, what else can I do with my skill set? How else can I be of service to others, but in a way that allows me to be home more with my family? So that So that is when I started the Résumé Rx, originally on the side. And eventually, over time, it became my primary focus, particularly during 2020 when I took a step back clinically. And it has been a really wild ride. It's definitely evolved and ebbed and flowed. And currently, I'm kind of back into clinical practice and working a little bit less on the business because of how I've structured it. All of that's been pretty intentional, but it's been really wonderful to have all these diverse experiences in healthcare, at the bedside in traditional roles, as an entrepreneur, as a service provider for other nursing professionals. So I feel like I've had some great experiences, and I'm excited to talk a little bit more about them.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. And I kind of was wondering, how long were you an NP for?
Yeah. So, yep. So I've been an NP for 12 years, and it was really after about that 6 or 7 year mark that I ended my full-time clinical career. And 2020 to the end of 2022 was a complete clinical hiatus for me. So I kind of kept up to date with classes and continuing ed, and then re-entered clinical practice part-time at the end of, or really the fall of 2022.
Fine. Let's talk a little bit about that hiatus. And also, I think we both know that there was a shift in your career. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that shift and what kind of brought about that change and why did you decide to change?
Sure. So in August of 2019, I had my third baby, and we had moved to a new state, and I decided to just take an extended maternity leave, really, in the sense that I wasn't looking for a job anytime soon. The Résumé Rx was providing me, a decent income. I really didn't have any urgency to return to clinical practice. And by the time I decided that I was ready, when my little one was about 3 months old, I found a job, a per diem role working in emergency medicine, which was my clinical background. So the plan was to go back per diem, work 1 day a week, focus on the Résumé Rx the rest of the time. And by the time my credentialing went through and I was kind of approved for my start date, the date was the first week of April in 2020. And this was right outside of New York City. And if you remember what was going on at the beginning of April 2020 in New York City, that was really the height of the COVID surge there. And in the meantime, I had lost all of my childcare. And I didn't really have a way to be able to commit to this job while also keeping myself and my family safe, especially having an infant at home. So it ended up being something that wasn't entirely a choice. It kind of felt like it was a decision that was made for me based on my circumstances. And I really struggled with it. I really struggled with saying, I can't work this job right now because I need to prioritize myself and my family when all my colleagues were essentially fighting this big fight that I decided not to help with. Like that was a really difficult identity struggle for me. The irony of it was that for several months, if not a year or more, I had been wanting to step back clinically and focus on the Résumé Rx full time because I had such confidence that if it was my primary focus, I could really grow it to great scale and have a lot of impact. I didn't have the guts to make the decision and listen to what I knew was true. So ultimately, that decision ended up being made for me because of the circumstances. And everything turned out to be true. I made it my primary focus, and that's when a lot of my growth happened. And, I, looking back on it, I maybe wish that I had more trust in myself and in what I knew I could do, and kind of less shame around feeling like I was less of a healthcare provider for not working in a New York City ER in April of 2020. So it was an interesting identity struggle and an interesting set of circumstances, but ultimately is kind of part of my story on both sides, part of my clinical story, part of my business story. So yeah, it was a wild ride.
That's so inspiring. And I think just listening to your story, there are so many similarities between what we went through and what you went through during the pandemic. Like, we started this podcast shortly before the pandemic. We didn't know what we were doing. I don't know if I trusted myself. We just felt like we had a lot we wanted to share and nobody was listening. So we just created our own platform. And I think a lot of nurses look to people like you and us, and they want to do what we're doing, but they're afraid, or they don't feel comfortable on social media. They don't feel comfortable putting themselves out there. But you've obviously done a really great job and you have a lot of followers. So I'm just wondering, with your identity now, do you see yourself as a nurse influencer? Why or why not?
I love this question. The nurse influencer has been a title that's kind of been given to me because of my influence, right? Because of the size of my community, the size of my following. But it's not something I entirely identify with, because I, very intentionally built a business, and I view, my work as an entrepreneur. I view myself as owning a company as opposed to owning a following, if that makes sense. But with a great following comes that responsibility that I'm looked up to for my opinion and for my influence. And so what has come from that has been the opportunity to be paid for my sponsorships or to provide advertisements, that type of thing. So I'm kind of on both sides at this point, because yes, I own my own company. I have products and services that are for sale. There's an exchange with the client on that end. But at the same point, I'm also retained by certain brands for different campaigns to provide my influence and to advertise their products and services. And I get paid for doing that too. So that's it's an interesting hat to wear. There was never a decision of, oh, I just want to go and collect a large following so then I can be an influencer. But, kind of by a byproduct of the growth and the fact that my company is very much a personal brand, right? I made the decision not to grow a company that's faceless, but rather a company that has my face and my opinion and my kind of essence at the core of it. And I think that's probably the difference, and why my company has also turned into kind of a nurse influencer brand.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such an amazing story. And I think that the way that you perceive it and the way that you perceive it is actually probably similar to the way that Sarah and I kind of perceive influencing too. Because I think that, there are so many people that are considered influencers, but it's really about whatever the brand is. So like your brand is your Résumé Rx, and, bringing communities together through empowering, folks to find their dream jobs. And, our call to action was having people speak about, issues related to nursing. And it's really, like you said, building that community. And I think that's probably what sets you apart from other influencers. Or maybe I should actually ask you this question, because we're on the subject of influencing. And you said you kind of feel like this has more been gifted to you. When you think about other influencers, would you say that are along the same lines, or would you see yourself more as kind of a nursing advocate, or just how do you even manage the idea of being called a nursing influencer?
Yeah, I think that I think that influencer, I don't know, because of the times, can, depending on who you ask, can have a little bit of a negative connotation. There can kind of be this perception that you're paid just to advertise things, whether you like them or not. And there are certainly some influencers who that's what they're about, right? There's a price tag for anything, for any type of advertisement. That's not how I see this responsibility. If a brand asks me to do any sort of paid campaign, it has to be something that I actually like and that I actually use. And I will tell you that the majority, if not all, of the campaigns and brand sponsorships that I've done have been with companies that I've actually loved and used before I was even in this business, or even had this opportunity. So I think that's how I see there being a little bit of a difference. And I much rather be known for being a thought leader, uh, as opposed to kind of having that title influencer. And maybe we're talking about semantics, but I, especially kind of the perception within the industry as a whole, within our community of healthcare professionals, I want to be equally revered for my thoughts and my ideas and my strategies regarding professional topics and job searching, as opposed to kind of just being known for being paid to promote other people's ideas and products. So that's kind of the difference that I see. That being said, I have some great relationships with nurse influencers. I have a lot of respect for other nurse influencers, and in full transparency, as part of my business with the Résumé Rx, I pay nurse influencers. I have affiliates of my programs who have most of the time used my template bundle, for example, who I offer them a commission, and a coupon code to promote to their audience so that they can share, and also be paid for their time and expertise. So it's kind of like I see all sides um, of this kind of weird industry that is influencing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it is very still similar to advocacy, and I like the piece where you said, you really want to be known for your thought leadership. That it's not just, it's not just that you're pushing anything, that there are certain things that you really truly find value to. And then also it's about some of the things that you say that you want people to listen to. It's very similar to kind of our MO as well in terms of the work that we do. I do find the whole idea behind influencing very, very interesting, because I guess when I think about influencers, and not specifically nurse influencers, like the big names as celebrities come up. So you think about like the Kardashians, you think about all these other folks, but I feel like nurses have a very special place, particularly because we hold so much trust of the public, that it's really that we're almost more scrutinized than these other folks, where I don't think that's actually necessarily fair. So
yeah, and I think that there's this perceptions that nurse influencers have to look or act a certain way. Like there's not much diversity when you think about nurse influencers. So I think part of the reason that I'm comfortable just kind of putting myself out there is I want people to see someone that looks like them, or doesn't have to fit a certain mold. I don't know if I would consider us influencers. I would like also to be viewed as a thought leader, but I don't think it has to be mutually exclusive. You can be a bit of both, and that's okay as long as it works for you and you're happy with it. I just never wanted, like when we started the podcast, we thought we wanted people to hear what our thoughts were. And so that's why initially we did an audio only one, because we didn't want the focus to be on what we looked like. You know, I don't think that's super important, but I also know that for people to really connect with us, sometimes it's nice to see a face. So that's kind of why we do video as well. But I'm really, inspired by what you do. And I'm just wondering, were there any sort of people that you looked up to or looked to for guidance when you first started out?
Yeah. So Katie Duke, who I would say is, one of our big name nurse influencers, right? Kind of a funny story about how we met and connected. I had just started the business and I was working on kind of my first digital campaign in launching my email list, right? I had my first kind of thing that I was going to give away for free in exchange for emails, and eventually I was going to announce the templates, the resume templates that I had for sale. And Katie had found me when I had like no following and had reached out to me and asked if I would write her resume for her. And, she was prepared to pay me. And this was back when I was offering that as a service. And I had the idea to say, hey, rather than paying me, can we do an exchange, right? Can you give me some promotion in exchange for this service? Because I knew that, I had no budget to pay someone like her to talk about my services. But if I could get some sort of boost in my following because she talked about me, then that would be really wonderful. So that's what we worked out. So I revised her resume for her. She did a little video campaign for me, and we worked together on this small project. And we stayed in touch and we developed a friendship. We met in person multiple times, and we've mentored each other, believe it or not. She really surprised me when at some point she said she looked to me as a business mentor for her when, it was really the other way around. So she's definitely been kind of a constant person in my life in this similar industry who I've looked to for guidance, and we've really, I guess, been peer mentors to one another on the entrepreneurship side of things. And I've definitely gone to her with questions about, brand campaigns and sponsorships because she has so much more experience on that aspect of influencing. And on the flip side, she's looked to me for guidance on growing her own personal brand and offerings through her company. So that's been a really wonderful relationship that I would say that I've looked to her a lot. And then my other kind of biz bestie is Liz from Real World NP. She has a platform with online courses. She has a YouTube channel with wonderful, wonderful clinical education. And we have such an overlapping audience. We really serve the same group of people, but really on different topics. And we started our businesses around the same time. So she's been another, I'd say, peer mentor of mine where we would just kind of chat on Voxer nearly every week and help each other through. Because, one thing about entrepreneurship, and maybe you both can relate, is first of all, there's no real handbook or playbook on how to do things. And second of all, it can be kind of isolating unless you're intentional about surrounding yourself with other people who are doing the same thing, especially other people in the nursing industry. I feel like online entrepreneurship is isolating in and of itself, and even more so when we're in such a niche industry. So those are definitely two people who have been kind of key players in my support system throughout the years.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's such a powerful and important story for even all of our listeners to kind of take back in terms of their own personal lives. Because I think that is kind of the community that we've been talking about that we need to see within nursing too, just because I think there's a little bit of a history in terms of how nurses on the unit might act to each other, not all the time, but seeing that camaraderie where, you've found people within your community that will help support you, build you up, lift you up, and that you'll do the same for them. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, and I think when you're doing stuff online, right, you need to find your community. Like you said, it can be isolating when you're working somewhere in person. You kind of have like built-in coworkers, people are always around, but you need to be more intentional about it when you are on your own. And I think it's great hearing that you and Katie kind of look up to each other, like you're supporting each other, you're cheering each other on. That's what we really need to be doing in nursing. And there's certainly more than enough room for more nurse entrepreneurs, more nurse influencers, more nurse thought leaders. Like, I'm really about supporting each other and not trying to cut people down because, like I want to be the only one doing a certain thing. So that's one thing I've really enjoyed about entrepreneurship, is that I've seen a lot of nurses supporting each other, which is really the direction that we need to go in with nursing and not feel threatened by other people. So I don't know where I was going with this question, but I just love all the work you've done. And I think that what you have done is certainly something that a lot of people want to do. Have you noticed just putting yourself out there? I know nurses have a lot of fears with doing that type of thing, like being on social media. Do you think there are any downsides to putting yourself out there?
Yeah, I think it's really it's tricky. We alluded to this kind of at the top of the episode, but um there is kind of this fear of perception from other people, other nurses, um and there's also kind of the concern about adhering to professional standards, maintaining code of conduct. It's definitely the trickiest, I think, when you're also employed, right? Um, because when you're traditionally employed, even if it's just per diem or part time, you're much more likely to not only be under the scrutiny of your leadership, but also actually have written rules that you can and cannot follow. Um, when it comes to your presence online. And I think it's an interesting debate about whether those whether your outside activities should be kind of monitored or kind of policed in that way. um I'm not entirely sure like what my stance is on that, because I can really see both sides, right? We are the most trusted profession. We're kind of expected to maintain a certain persona. But at the same time, are we really expected to be only this persona in all aspects of our life, to the point where someone can have a say of what we do at our time away from work? Um, so I think it's really a gray area, especially when you see people who are, making social media content while on the job, while on the clock, or getting really close to HIPAA violations. Like that, I have pretty strong feelings about that. And, there have been some interesting stories of, um, nurses who have created TikToks that have gone viral and that have then gotten fired. And, I'm not sure I disagree with that decision because of, what they were doing on the time, on their work time. So, there are definitely some downfalls when you're employed. There's also, you're under the scrutiny of a different lens when you choose to share things online, and it kind of opens you up to unsolicited feedback, unsolicited criticism. um, it can be tough to feel like you have privacy. There people can be a little bit more demanding of your time and attention, and get upset if you don't reciprocate that. People can be disrespectful of your boundaries when it comes to your DM inbox, for example. I've seen all those things happen, to myself, and I've had to implement some kind of strict boundaries, because otherwise it can really take a toll on your mental health. And I kind of have a love hate relationship with social media, to be honest. If I could maintain my business and be completely off of social media, I think that I probably would be. Um, just for the protection of my time and my sanity and all that. Um, so it's definitely it's like a be careful what you wish for type of thing. So when nurses, I get a lot of questions from nurses who want to start a business or who want to start some sort of platform. And I think it's important to ask yourself a lot of questions about what that means to you, what type of platform or community or brand you want to create, and really understand what's involved in creating that, but then also like what's involved in maintaining that and what that means for your personal life and all that. So I obviously could say a lot about a lot about the topic of social media, but I'll stop myself there.
It's funny because we were actually just talking about this very topic before this podcast, and I think we're kind of feeling the same way. Where I guess I would classify this as a good problem. Like we've gotten to a stage now where a lot of people are following us. We also get a lot of engagement, and it's like, where do we draw the line between wanting to respond to every message and protecting our time? And I think it's just like, a lot of people want to be where we are because they're really just trying to, get their foot in the door. But at the same time, how do we handle, all the messages that we're getting, all the engagement when we can't always give back what we want to? It's a challenge, but I think that certainly we wouldn't be where we are without social media. Like it's helped us for sure. And it's like a double-edged sword sometimes.
Yeah, and I feel like the whole idea of social media, the fact, and we talk about this a lot, the fact that it can be used as an engine for change, it can be used for good. There is a lot of negativity. So like, I mean, just over the past couple months, we've just been seeing kind of like this downward spiraling trend on I would say particularly on Twitter, not necessarily all the other social media platforms, but just that it almost makes us feel like, is there really any point for us to continue to engage at the level that we are at versus peeling back and actually, protecting our brand in a sense, really, and still kind of maintaining that connection with our communities in a different way. That's definitely something that we're both thinking of. And it's one of the things I kind of wanted to touch on was the aspect of this kind of like duality, right? So nurses are supposed to be seen as kind of like demure, quiet, all these things that we are definitely not. And then again, that speaks differently with us actually showing our opinion and our voices on social media. And you kind of touched on, there's that negative side where, your employer might want to get in, where do those boundaries kind of reach? I find that in our experience, it's actually been quite positive. Our employers have virtually kind of left us alone to our own devices. But again, we are now for the most part self-employed. But I think the other piece is just, I think this is actually a really good conversation. I think that it's important for folks, particularly nurses, to actually get out there and to actually engage with other nurses in a meaningful way, in a thoughtful way, to share their opinions and their voices and to really build community. Because I feel like one of the things that nurses don't do very well is actually building really strong networks with each other. Because I feel like we can move so much different things. We can work towards positive social change. We can advocate for things that we want to see better in healthcare. It's just, again, really, how do we get there? And I think that, some of the work that you're doing, the work that Sarah and myself are doing, are really important movements. So although you might not want to call yourself an influencer, you definitely have earned that title.
And one last thing I wanted to touch on is I noticed that you are a fan of true crime, and we are huge into true crime. We've had a couple podcasts where we brought on someone named Bruce Sackman. He's a retired investigator of medical serial killers. So when we saw this, we're like, okay, we have to ask you about this. What is your interest in true crime, and do you have a favorite true crime story? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Man, I think it all started. It all started when I was a young child staying home from school and watching Unsolved Mysteries on Lifetime.
Oh, I love that show.
Like, I think if I had to pinpoint how and why, like, I just became fascinated. And that was definitely the show that had me fascinated. And I love a puzzle. Like, I love a physical jigsaw puzzle. I love, brain teasers and all sorts of mystery things to figure out. And so, there's been multiple times where I've been at myself at a hotel, either because, I'm away doing a speaking engagement or at a conference or whatever. And you would think that, if I put on the TV or put on Netflix and want to watch something, it would be, like a lighthearted rom-com, but I always find myself in a true crime documentary, like inevitably. I really love all the medical true crime stories. So, and like the podcasts really are probably where I started, like with um, Dr. Death and gosh, what am I trying to think of? What's the one with the this was just a Netflix
Oh, the
remake.
good nurse.
Yeah, the nurse who used the
Yes,
insulin.
yeah.
Yeah. And I had been vaguely aware of that one because I'm pretty sure that that case is the reason why when I became an RN in New Jersey, I had to get fingerprinted.
Oh,
Oh, we don't have
damn.
It
that.
took place, that was like a New Jersey case. And that was the first state I've been licensed in like 5 or 6 states. And that's been the only state where I had to show up in person and get fingerprinted. And I was like, this is kind of bizarre. And I looked into why and my sources brought me to that case. Um, but yeah, I just that's always what I find myself drawn to, and I like fictional crime too. I'm reading a novel right now, and it's about a whodunit kind of murder situation. So I don't know if it's just I like dark and twisty things or what, but um, yeah, I can't get away from it, and it
It's all
but then
good.
again, I also really loved trauma, life in the ER
Yes,
on
it was
like
very
time
good.
too
Yeah.
when I was a kid. Like I was way too young to be watching that type of thing. I was watching, real life medical disaster shows as well. So I think I've just always been drawn to disaster and kind of the stories that come out of it. I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, your background was an ER nurse, so I guess it makes
True.
sense, right? And I mean,
Very
I
true.
have a huge passion for horror movies and true crime too, so it's fine. It's all good. We have our likes and whatever, so it's really cool. But I have to recommend you have to see Love and Death. It's on Netflix. That one's really good too.
Okay, I'm writing it down right
Add
now.
that one
Love and
into
Death.
your add that one too, Sarah.
Okay, all
Love
right.
and Death.
Love and Death.
Yes,
Got
so
it.
that was a really good true crime.
I feel like a lot of nurses are just into true crime. I don't know if it's just like, I don't know if I can explain it. We just love it because, like, for me, right, it's almost like this is something I would never really see in my line of work because my background is maternal child nursing. Right. So I feel like it's me just sort of like, I'm really into the whole medical aspect of it, like the DNA part, like how did they figure out like how long they've been dead based on like, how long, the types of bugs on the body. So I like all that. It's almost like living out a fantasy because it's something I would never actually do. But because of the medical aspect, I'm really drawn to it. And also the psychological aspect of, why did they do what they did? And sometimes there is no reason, but I just like thinking about that kind of thing. So I'm sure
I
we
agree.
could.
Medical forensics is really fascinating, and actually something that I've been able to do as kind of a byproduct of my interest, but also because of my medical background, is I'm a certified sexual assault nurse examiner. So that was kind of an interesting way to kind of marry those two interests of forensics and also nursing. So, collecting a kit appropriately and kind of learning the chain of command and all that was really interesting to me. And it's also, an important service to be able to provide.
Amazing. So I think we've gotten a bit off topic here, but I really enjoyed this sidebar. I'm just wondering, is there anything else you wanted to go back to or anything else you wanted to share about yourself that we didn't get to?
No, I wouldn't say about myself, but maybe just kind of a message of encouragement to anyone who's listening who has a big idea that maybe seems like too big to speak out loud. I think that probably, maybe you both can relate, but for me, all of my great ideas that have turned out to be um, successful, and even those that haven't, started with an idea that I was afraid to speak out loud because it just seemed so impossible or so unattainable. And if you think about every wonderful innovation or story or anything that's ever existed started off as someone's idea that they got the courage to say out loud. And I really believe that nurses are in the perfect place to have the knowledge, the creativity, the skill set to bring so many great ideas to reality. So, whether it's starting a podcast or inventing a medical device or being an influencer, whatever it is, I just want to encourage people that, you know, we are doing this so that you can do what you want to do too. And just want to, speak a little encouragement to people who may need it.
And awesome. And where can people find you?
You can find me online. My website is theresumerx.com. I'm on Instagram at theresumerx. That's my primary social place. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. So if you search my name, Amanda Guarniere, or just search the Résumé Rx, you'll find my business page and my personal page on there as well. I am not really on Twitter, but hearing that you guys are, maybe I'll take a peek and see if I want to go down that rabbit hole. Probably not.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for coming on the Green Nurse podcast. We really enjoyed this conversation with you today.
Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Gritty Nurse podcast. Check us out on grittynurse.com. We are speakers, thought leaders, upcoming authors. Book us at your next event.
And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and all other major podcast platforms. Don't forget to subscribe, listen, and leave us a review.
So, thanks again for listening, and stay gritty.